I want to welcome you to a walk down Spring Garden Road, and this is all for the Heritage Trust of Nova Scotia, because what we're doing today is looking at the rocks that form the street and the buildings. And in this, there's going to be a heritage of Nova Scotia mineral industry, as well as the whole idea of how do we get certain things out of the earth and how do we use them as we build our cities. And Halifax and Spring Garden Road is one of the best examples of this. So, we're off in a few minutes to look at all of the rocks of Spring Garden Road. But one of the more important things that everybody forgets is what binds all of these rocks together, and that's the mortar. Now, the mortar used to be made from seashells that were burned, and you get calcium oxide, and this makes a fairly resistant mortar, but not as good as the mortar that we use now, which is cement plus sand. So right here, cement plus sand, and this is a very good strong mortar. And you can see that even though it's relatively recent, it's not changing and it's not breaking apart. And that's how you can tell bad mortar from good mortar, because the bad mortar will begin to split apart, you know, just like I'm splitting this off like this. So as we set off, I want you to look at not only the styles of the rocks themselves, and I'll tell you where they came from, but look at the mortar. Look at the way it's all bound together, because it'll be different. So you ready to go? Let's go off. So we were talking over the public gardens entrance about mortar and about the formation of mortar using seashells or limestone, and you burn that and you drive off the CO2. Well, here you're standing on something that is a manufactured product, part of the, from the late 1900s onward. So concrete, which involves, see all of the stones in there? That's a very important filler that goes into concrete along with water and cement. And cement is nothing, well, it's a few things more than just calcium oxide. It's calcium oxide plus aluminum oxide and a few other things depending on how the manufacturer and the client wishes to have this set. So if it wants to be something you set quickly, then you add a little gypsum to it. If you don't want it to set quickly, then it's sort of like this. And so we've got earth materials in there, limestone burned to get rid of the carbon dioxide, plus mixed with water, and the stones that are ground up and sized specifically. So you notice that they're all the same size. So that's how we get this building material. But here is building material from in the past. So come on over. Time and time again on this street, on Spring Garden Road and all across Halifax, you'll see this rock right here. This is a sandstone. Sandstone comes from the breakdown of rocks on the surface and rivers and water moving all of these sand grains and mud to another location and then compacting them into hard rock. This is from Wallace, Nova Scotia. Part of the 300-million-year-old sandstones across northern Nova Scotia. And this is a very important building stone because it's simple to cut, just cut it in various ways. It's also easily chiseled into various things, so you can formulate very beautiful designs in it or carve things, but it has to be, in order to do that, it has to be uniform in grain size. This is a perfect example of uniform grain size. So you don't chip out the big grains as you're using a chisel. It just does what you want. So that's the neat thing about a fine grain, uniform size sand. But right behind me is something not from this part of Nova Scotia. That's from northern Nova Scotia. This step right here is one of the many granites that you're going to see. Now, this doesn't come from super far away, as in Sweden or Scotland. This is from Guysborough County, Queensport. So just like Herring Cove, there's a whole series of granite quarries south of Queensport. And Queensport has a beautiful harbor, So all of this was cut, brought by wagons to the seashore, and then taken out by schooner all the way down to Halifax. So welcome to the Queensport Granite, right here. I'm looking at the guide that was published many years back to Spring Garden Road. So it's the building stones and history represented by these buildings right here on Spring Garden Road. So it's also a great source of information, although as you look at it, you'll see that the whole streetscape has changed quite a bit. But this hasn't. Here is a chunk of granite that comes from Balmoral, near the Queen's, rest spot, famous vacation site in Scotland. So this is a red granite. You notice all the granites that we spoke about in Nova Scotia don't have red. So of course the question is why? Well, the red in here is a microscopic series of little crystals of hematite. Hematite is red, it's iron rust. So this gives it the color. So these are the feldspars, the same as what you saw in the granites around the corner here, both from Queensport and Halifax. But this has the iron oxide in it, hematite, and that's why it's red. But everything else is the same, except that it's not a coarse grain granite. So this cooled more quickly than the others that you've seen. Okay, now you've seen the red granite. Let's go look at something called Norwegian blue pearl. That's the trade name, right here. One of the spectacular things about this particular rock right here is that it has no quartz in it. So this is of interest to us geologists because granite has loads of quartz. Up to 25–30% of the total amount of crystals is quartz, but not here. This is all feldspar. And this feldspar has loads amount of sodium and calcium in it compared to the sodium only of other granites. So this becomes very distinctive, and it forms crystals that have a spacing of cell units, and cell units are the alignment of atoms. So when you get a whole series of cell units, something like this, the light goes into the units and then it refracts. Refraction is it bends, and then as it comes back out, refraction and reflection. Reflection is just bounce off. Refraction is it goes in, bends, and it may get reflected back. But as it comes back, the crystals emit or reflect the light in different ways so that you get this interference between different rays. And it gives rise to color because each interference produces a certain wavelength of color. So this is all blue. But this type of color I've seen is a beautiful red, like that. That's unusual. I've seen a crystal this big, and I wanted it so badly it just wouldn't come out. This is the normal color, blue and green. And this is called chatoyance. And the type of feldspar is called plagioclase. And as I said, it has a lot more calcium than other feldspars. So this is distinctive, being solely of plagioclase and little bits of iron oxide in a different form. It's not hematite, it's magnetite and other things like that that produce dark minerals. So this is a distinctive rock called a northosite. But in the trade, it's called Norwegian blue pearl or blue granite. Well, we come to the fourth type of rock along the street here, and this is totally an unusual one. This is larvikite. And larvikite is named after an outcrop of this rock in Norway, near Larva, Norway. What makes it so interesting is that it doesn't have potassium feldspar. That's the red and the grayish feldspar that you saw in the granites further down the street. This is sort of a yellowish color from a bit of alteration. So it's a unique rock that has calcium, sodium, and potassium in the feldspar. None of the other rocks have that. So that's what makes larvikite so very interesting. So that's why it has a bit of color, because the sodium and calcium may react with fluids that move through the rock, and it alters it to this yellowish color, which is yet another mineral called epidote. Welcome to 5670 Spring Garden Road, which has 3 unique rock types in it. You haven't seen anything before like this. So what you're standing on is a metamorphic rock, a rock that's been changed and altered by heat and pressure. But look at the little stand right here, the plant stand. That looks similar, doesn't it? That's flagstone. It's siltstone, which is like a gritty mud. And it was not metamorphosed. And I don't know where it comes from. Probably New York State, Pennsylvania, or in southern Ontario. So it's a rock that was formed in the backwaters of a river system, and it was just hardened into rock by pile after pile of rock on top of it. Now what is underneath our feet over here is something very different. This is the same type of starting point, except that it's metamorphosed. So heat and pressure have altered this. Now where did this come from? Again, we couldn't trace it, but I suspect it could be from parts of Ontario or into Vermont, New Hampshire. There are quarries there that were on the sides of the granites that may have taken this material out. So it's not extremely hot. And I want to talk about metamorphism because as we go up the street, you'll see evidence of a rock that has been heated up and squeezed so much that it's begun to crystallize and melt, or I should say it the other way, melt and then recrystallize. So this has never been close to it. So what would be the temperature of this? Oh, this might be something like 400 degrees, 500 degrees, well below the melting point of rock. Now, I've been to Italy, finally. I always wanted to go there. And one of the things that I wanted to go to is the Carrara marble. 2,000 years it's been mined and quarried. This whole mountain is now reshaped by all these different quarries. And inside this building is the classic example of Carrara white marble. We can't get in, unfortunately, but if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see it's all a white color, and it's actually the same type of marble. The entire mass of the mountain is pretty much uniform, and it's just like talking about sandstone. You know, you want a nice uniform crystal size so that when you chisel it and sculpt it, it doesn't come apart in great big chunks. Carrara marble, although it has, you might say, blemishes in it with these lines that represent former layers in the marble, but now they're so homogenized that they don't have any significance. So you can chisel it anywhere you want, as Michelangelo did in making the statue of David, and it works perfectly. So in the same sense that the sandstone from northern Nova Scotia is beautiful for carving, so is this. And it's 150 million years old, the age of the middle part of the dinosaurs. And how did it get metamorphosed? Well, this is a little bit hotter than the flagstones you're stepping on right now. So I said this is about 500 degrees. That might be 600, but it never melted. We know that because we don't see any evidence of it. Now, further down the street, you'll see the evidence of melting, which is really exciting to a geologist because that means that things were really, really hot. So now you know the difference between unmetamorphosed rock and metamorphosed rock. And you'll see some fine examples of greater metamorphism as we go down the street. Well, here we are in front of the Sovereign Building, which is halfway between the Public Gardens and Barrington Street. But this has yet another red granite. So what is the difference between all these red granites? Well, first of all, the red is here because there's iron oxide that is red colored in the lattice structure of the feldspar. So that's why there's so many reds in here. And this reddish color is very unique. It's not everywhere in granites. Then the gray is quartz. So you can see nice colors of red and gray. But this rock has a truly unique setting to it because unusual in granite is layers. I want you to step back and see if you can identify where the layers are. And I'm just going to step back with you. Do you see something that's running vertically? So these are layers that are more rich in feldspar, more rich in quartz, more rich in feldspar, more rich in quartz. Totally unique. We see this occasionally in the granites around Halifax, but it's not known to be part of granite. So we look at this like I did yesterday and said, wow, this is really exciting because this is a unique manifestation of the crystallization of the granite. So it crystallizes more feldspar, more quartz, which means that you supply more potassium, sodium ions for this layer than this layer. This has more silica and oxygen, and then more back to more of the other. So it's really unique to see these layers. This granite is from Sweden, 1.8 billion years old. So this is an import, polished very beautifully like all of the other rocks you've seen on the street. And it takes a beautiful shine to it because all of the minerals are so hard that they don't chip just by flying things into them. Oh no, not another granite, but I think you guys can identify that. So where do you think it's from, based on what I said? Purcell's Cove, large amounts of xenoliths. So this is a classic thing from one of the quarries, probably based on its size, the crystal size, further back from the road, coarser grained. So it's at the edge of the Pluton, which stretches all the way across to, almost Aspetogan. And therefore we're on the eastern edge of the Pluton, the massive granite, and this cooled quickly right at the contact, which is northwest arm, and then it cooled more slowly a couple of 100 meters in, which is where this is. We talked about at 5670 Spring Garden Road seeing low-grade metamorphic rocks. They were the pavers that you walked on. Here we come to high-grade metamorphic rocks. And what do we mean by high-grade? It's a definition of temperature. So those were low temperature, maybe not much more than 500 degrees centigrade. This is upwards of 800 degrees centigrade. So how do I know that? Well, first of all, this has gone through an awful lot. Do you see all of these layers right here? This means that everything has been homogenized and squeezed like this. And in doing so, all of the initial layers are gone. So when we have layers like the vertical pavers on the planters at 5670, individual layers sort of like this, and they're distinct and uniform. These are distinct by color, but they're not distinct by anything else. In other words, everything across here has been homogenized, and it's been heated up so much that we begin to take out the first minerals that begin to melt and crystallize, quartz and feldspar. So potassium-based feldspar, the same thing that's in the red granite, the gray granite, is in here along with quartz and a few other little minerals. So what we see here is totally interesting because this is heated up so high that we've got partial melting. The whole rock hasn't melted, just little bits of it. So this is extremely high grade. And for a geologist that studies the way that rocks deform, this is an absolute gift, because I came here yesterday and I said, oh my goodness, look at this. And what was really exciting is, you see these folds right here? Well, they're uniform. Whoever put this together, you know, showed these slabs very nicely. So they're serially cut. So this one was put here, the one here was put up there, the one on top of that was put up there. So this is how the stonemasons put together a beautiful shape. They'll do serial cuts and then put them in like this so that it flows through. But what I noticed is, here's a quartz vein. This is distinct from quartz and feldspar. The quartz vein cuts across everything, so it comes later. It comes even later than this. This is partial melting. This came in later and cuts across. You see the angle is roughly about 5 degrees or so. So this is the detail that we geologists would look at. And what's exciting for us in my field of discipline is that this was not always at 5 degrees. It was more like this when it first was intruded. Then the whole thing was squeezed so much that this rotated like this. And that's what makes it so exciting to me. So your takeaway on this part of the street is this building stone is extremely high grade, partially melted because of the high temperature. So this stop at the former Royal Bank building, right across from the new library, is unique because it's got limestone with all sorts of fossils in it, and then secondly, 3 types of granite. So here's the first type, right here. This, I believe, although I haven't been able to locate where it comes from, but it looks like it's the same type of granite from down in the valley, up against South Mountain near Annapolis Royal. So I know that no other area has been mining granite, quarrying granite and making it into curbing. So I think that's where this came from. So that's another granite for your collection in your head. And now let's move over here and have a look at 2 other granites. Where does that gray granite come from? Oh, come on. It's a Purcell's Cove. You see all of the black xenoliths in it? Okay, so now you've seen 2 granites that are both gray. That is a little bit darker gray. That's a somewhat lighter gray with xenoliths in it. So that's distinct. And we use these things of color as well as xenoliths. Now I want to show you the 3rd granite right here. Notice the color is different, sort of a creamy colored. But if you look very carefully, you'll see that there's feldspars about the size of your finger. I can't point them out because I can't get my finger through the fence here. But that's distinctive of the Terrence Bay granite, which is yet another of these small intrusions that's within the Halifax Pluton. So you see, even within a pluton, we can have different types of granites because there's a different differentiation of the chemicals necessary to form the minerals. So that's what makes this really distinct. So we have 3 granites then, once again. Terrence Bay, and you'll see this again and again. You've already seen this one, the gray one, with the xenoliths in it. That's classic Purcell's Cove. And then this one that's the curbing that comes from down in the valley opposite Annapolis Royal, roughly. This is the Nova Scotia Courthouse. This was used as a courthouse originally, then it became the Nova Scotia Museum, and then when the Nova Scotia Museum's new home was built on Summer Street, this went back to being a courthouse, which it is now. Except it's not being used during COVID-19 because there's a problem with small spaces, too many people. So new rental spaces have been set up. But this has 3 types of rock in it that are very intriguing and a lot of history. So let's walk over and have a look. There are 2 types of sandstone here. One here and one over there. So they look the same and they're fine grain, uniform size so that they're easily carved. See how intricate this carving is? Very easy for a skilled craftsman because the uniform grain size means that nothing gets plucked out. So you don't have these big chunks falling out. So beautiful work here. All of this sandstone here across the front comes from Mary's Point, which is near the National Park, Alma, and Riverside Albert is another town that is near. So this area in New Brunswick was a mining center, first for millstones, gritstones, so that these were used to grind all sorts of flour and so on. And then later, when the demand for building stone became very important in public buildings, Mary's Point supplied this color right here, sort of a pinkish gray, pinkish red color. And do you know the other location in Nova Scotia, in Halifax, that has this? Well, the location is the museum, the art gallery. So the art gallery was built at the same time as this, 1860. And that has the same color, it's a deeper red, and it came from Mary's Point, a different layer within the quarry. So Mary's Point, and then over here, the classic situation of Wallace sandstone. And if you look at this carefully, you'll say, aha, that's the old St. Patrick's High School. It was. Secondly, it's the same color as Province House, which it is. The same color as Government House, which it is. So all of those, St. Patrick's High School, this part, extension of the Courthouse, Province House, Government House, all came from the same quarry in Wallace, Nova Scotia. And again, beautiful fine grain, even, so that you can easily chisel it. You notice that there's a very delicate little marking on it, which just adds a little bit of class to it. Now this is much more over here. These are fluted and then chiseled so that the actual block was out here. So these were big blocks that were cut back. And they were done probably on site and then put in by the stonemasons. Now, do you see a familiar rock down at the bottom? And I ask you again, where's that from? Purcell's Cove, exactly. So this is Purcell's Cove granite, and it was specially quarried for these and brought over by scow or by boat and put in here. By the 1860s, everybody in the building trade in Nova Scotia had learned something very important. If I were to take some water and pour it in here, I could pour the entire cup of water, if I did it slowly, into the rock. Because the rock has all sorts of open spaces, which I'll see if I can duplicate. It's like this, and you can see between my fingers the open spaces. Well, that's what the grains in here are like. So the water will disappear in there. The problem that Province House has is that this rock goes right down to the base. So water goes in and it immediately in a freeze-thaw cycle begins to break the rock apart. So the lower courses of sandstone at Province House have been problematic. So they've been experimenting, first of all, with replacing all of the really bad blocks of rock, and then secondly, maybe putting an impermeable membrane in a spray, like an epoxy, just along the very bottom. Then the rest is open and similar rock to when it was first put in. By the 1860s, the museum, I keep saying museum, I mean the art gallery, and this building had a lower course of granite, which is impermeable, no water can get in, and therefore it kept the moisture from getting into the upper courses. So now you see this everywhere. And if you look carefully on Hollis Street, you'll see it in all of the newer buildings. So the provincial building directly across the street from the legislature has the granite, and then the upper courses of the same sandstone. So now we preserve the base of the structure from the wear of just getting water in. And because the interesting thing is, because water is a molecule that has a positive and a negative side to it, it will line up positive, negative, and actually just the lining up will break the minerals and break the rock. Something as simple as wetting and drying will break the rock apart. So you see, that's why you want to keep it off the ground. And part of the renovation of Government House on Barrington Street was to look after that lower course. That was so important. So welcome to the Cathedral. This basilica was built here on the property that was granted by the governor and council to the Archdiocese, newly formed Archdiocese, Roman Catholic of Nova Scotia. And this goes way back into the 1840s. So before that, of course, everything was dominated by the Church of England. But here was the first church. This is the second church that was built, and it's a beautiful church. It is a large, 160 feet down this way, about 40 feet across in the front, and it's made of a solid Nova Scotia rock called Ironstone, which we will see as we go around on the other side. But this rock on the outside is new because there was a hand of God activity that took place here. A lightning bolt struck down the relatively tall, but not as tall as this, spire right here. And at this point, the church said, we've got to build something a little bit better. So they chose granite for the reasons that I spoke about and built this. And it's quite beautiful. Now let's have a look at the granite. And there are two granites right over here. First of all, you have to remember back that, maybe in the middle 80s, every single stone was taken out of this facade and parked over here in the parking lot and numbered. Then it was all put back. So what happened? Why was that? Because the mortar in between was giving way. And when some steeplejacks went up there, they said, we've got stone that has cracks in it, and if you don't do something, wedging and thawing, freezing and thawing, is going to break apart the stone on the top from the stone underneath because there's no mortar. So that was the real problem. So they found the money, took every stone down, put it over there, and then rebuilt the entire structure. So this is all renewed, not new, except for here. So here you see two different granites. Granite 1, Granite 2. You notice the difference? So, where do these come from? I think this is the classic granite from Purcell's Cove right here. A typical medium gray, fairly coarse grain, doesn't have any xenoliths in it, but it's a very nice looking granite. This one is different. See the difference in color? And this is like the base of the Royal Bank building, the former Royal Bank building. And this, I believe, is the granite that comes from Terence Bay, down at the southern end of the Halifax Peninsula. And the reason I think that is not only because of the colors, but some of the big crystals in here, like this, right there. And these crystals look like the big teeth of horses, dents de cheval. So the texture is called dents de cheval, horse's teeth. And these ones right here clearly show that. So that's the typical texture of Terence Bay. It's really interesting to know where to get granite. Right now, and in the past, back to 1860s, there were booklets, you might say there were catalogs that described all the different types of rocks you could buy. So they would be from various parts of the world or Nova Scotia. So you could easily, as an architect or builder, call up the supplier, person at the quarry, and say, I need X number of cubic feet. And he would do that. So everything was known, as I say, in catalogs, and so all of this Terence Bay granite was known for its texture and size, and samples were polished and given out so that everybody could see what they are. And that's what we do today when we talk about the selling of Nova Scotia building stone. We have polished samples that show very clearly just what is available, what their texture is like, and how they take a polish, because this is all very important. Now this is rough cut and rough, I won't say sanded, but roughed up so that when you step on it, you're not going to slide in a slushy snow. This has got a little bit of grip to it. See the red granite, yet another granite. This one is from Scotland, Aberdeen. And this is a pale granite, paler than anything you've seen in a reddish granite on the street so far. So this was there for ornamentation. Now, I just want to point out the sign and the scroll work at the top of the columns. This requires a certain high level of expertise in order to do, because of course you need an artisan to be able to cut something as hard as granite. It's not like doing the ornate designs on some of the blocks of the courthouse, which are easy. I mean, you still have to be an artisan, but that's relatively easy because the rock is soft. This is ultra hard. You have to have hardened steel, and they're changing the steel that they use to carve after just a few strokes because it becomes dull. Because the minerals are harder than the actual steel. And this is before, you know, if we go back into some of the old granite, it's before we had hardened steel. Now we'd use tungsten steel or molybdenum steel, alloys that actually make a very hard steel so that it's easy to cut into granite, although still very difficult.
Do we know where these were carved? Were they carved in Nova Scotia?
Were these carved in Nova Scotia? They were probably carved in a shed, maybe here on site, most likely on site. But yes, done right here. Because again, this was Terence Bay granite. So the granite was brought around from Terence Bay and then unloaded down on the wharves and brought up here. Now, our next stop on this building is just to go around the side and look at the ironstone that forms this building plus so many others. This is the wall rock of my basement. It's also the wall rock of so many other basements and buildings in Nova Scotia. Most of the old part of Dalhousie campus is made of this, ironstone. The fence that goes along Coburg Road is made of this without the mortar. It's a drywall. So everywhere we've got this rock. And this comes from Dalhousie quarries across on Purcell's Cove area, just to the north of Purcell's Cove. And there are 3 of these areas that I see are now being developed. And this is the origin of this rock called ironstone. So what makes it like that? Well, first of all, the iron in it, in pyrite, comes out and it bleeds across as it's exposed to air, forming this color. And you can see it bleeding down into the mortar right here. So this is typical of ironstone. And yet, the compressive strength of ironstone surpasses granite. This is an extremely good rock. And so, as in granite, as in any kind of building stone, the key is not the strength of the rock, although it is, of course, you have to have a good, strong rock, but it's how good the mortar is. See, if you have lousy mortar, the building's going to fall down. So you really need a good, strong mortar, which is the correct amount of cement plus sand, and the cement has to be just right. It can't be just seashells that are burned because that has impurities in it. So you want something that has certain properties to it, because what you do is grind up the rock, reconstitute it in the kiln so that you have aluminum, calcium oxides that mesh together to form an extremely strong bond when you rehydrate it with water. So water, cement, and sand produces an excellent style of mortar. And then this is a very strong rock, so this means that this is an extremely strong building. And then for decoration, you notice your old friend right here. Where's that come from? Yes, Wallace. So look, Wallace, and here's the Ironstone, and where is this from? Purcell's Cove. So again, we have Purcell's Cove rock here, Wallace Sandstone, and Ironstone. These two are from the west side of Northwest Arm. This is from northern Nova Scotia. Let me just talk about the way in which we use this ironstone. Ironstone is actually a chunk like this, or this, or this, or this, are chunks that are created by the layers of rock. So you get layers that are thin, like this, and layers that are thick, like that. And all of these break apart easily. So in the quarries, these skilled workmen would simply take a large hammer and bang, like that, and the rock would fall apart. It's like what I saw in Pennsylvania for the slate quarries, making slate for roofs. And by the way, that is a slate roof up there. The way in which the slate for roofs was made is workmen would stand there and take a hammer, a very thin hammer, and go tunk, like this. And they were so good at this, just a little tap, like that, there would be the exact thickness. And then they put it into a saw and just cut it to the right size. So if they wanted things, slate material about that size, they would chip it and then cut it in the four sides, which is easy. The difficult part was making sure that you could cut it. Likewise here, the workmen in the quarry would just take a chunk like this and take a hammer and split it, and it would fall apart into two sizes. And if they wanted a whole bunch of big ones, they'd get that. But you see, this is thick, thinner, and thin. And that's what makes this so interesting. So the use of granite is a very strong connection to longevity, ability to pay for something, and it looks good and it doesn't weather very much. So as long as you have a nice looking granite, this can be here for some time. And do you see the problem that comes up with a mortar? It begins to break up. So that's the limiting factor about all stone. You've got to make sure that you've got a good type of mortar that will last under very trying conditions. And of course, along a walkway like this, there's salt put up, and salt takes in water, expands, and then, as we said before, water molecules are uneven. They have a positive and negative, so just wetting and drying will break things. And of course, there's frost heaving. So water going in, freezing, expanding 10%, and then melting again. But it looks very nice, and this, I believe, is a classic Purcell's Cove. So again, we're away from the contact, and we've got a more coarser grain here than others of the Purcell's Cove granite. So the more fragments or xenoliths that you see in it, the closer you are to the contact, and the more even grained, a little bit coarser grain, the further away you are. So after walking the length of Spring Garden from down there at the public gardens down to the Basilica, you've seen granites from all over the world. You've seen rocks with names like anorthosite and larvicite. Who would have guessed you'd hear these names? They sound like some strange animal that would be there on Halloween. And then you've also seen the ubiquitous Wallace sandstone all over, because it was so easy to cut, so easy to work, and it was readily made in northern Nova Scotia that it was brought down to Halifax and elsewhere. But you also saw an import from New Brunswick, the Courthouse across the street here, with this beautiful pinkish red. And so we see all of these stones as part of the cityscape and the streetscape of Spring Garden Road. And it's this very beautiful connection with the earth that makes Spring Garden Road so exciting to look at.